Pleasant good night to all and welcome to another edition of The People's Business. I'm your host, Shane Seeley, and tonight the focus is on you, the consumer. Of course, we've been facing high prices and other consumer issues over the past 2 years as the COVID-19 pandemic has thrown the world into a tailspin. We are exiting out of the pandemic, but we're going to put consumerism in focus tonight. So our topic, consumerism and you. Our guest tonight, we'll introduce you as well to a new organization. Maureen Holder is the Interim Executive Director of BCEN. That's the Barbados Consumer Empowerment Network. Also along with her is Mitchenson Beckles. He's an interim board member with BCEN, and Professor Hibourne Watson is on with us as well. He's an emeritus professor with the Bucknell University, Lewisburg, Pennsylvania in the U.S., giving us some academic perspective. So stay tuned. We will have a lot to talk about right here on this edition of The People's Business as we focus on consumerism and you. We'll be back in a moment. A quick turnaround on that break as we welcome you back to this edition of The People's Business as we focus on consumerism and you. And BCEN is a new organization, and we will give you some perspective on what their role in consumerism is and how they will be working to protect consumer rights here in Barbados. So Maureen Holder, she's the Interim Executive Director, and Mitchenson Beckles, he is also on the board. Professor Hibourne Watson, he is Emeritus Professor at the Bucknell University, as I mentioned a short while ago. So let's get into it and find out a bit first about BCEN. Maureen, tell us about this new organization. What's it all about?
Good evening, Shane. Good evening to all our listening and viewing audience. Now, the Barbados Consumer Empowerment Network is a non-profit and broad-based organization with a simple organizational structure. Its membership will be recruited from a wide cross-section of the population. It presently consists of a steering committee, interim board of directors. We have Leah Howell, we have Mr. Ambrose Carter, we have Dr. Erica Smith, we have Mr. Mitchenson Beckles, we have Miss Lynette Eastman, and myself. We comprise that steering committee. Now, Shane, we're guided by a constitution, a code of ethics. We submitted our application form for our incorporation, and we're waiting on the minister to sign off. And basically our mission statement, we are a consumer body, and we believe in Barbados that the consumers need a stronger and more active voice in the marketplace. And we will prioritize consumer rights in Barbados and take action to bring about change and improvements that more or less lead to building a more equitable marketplace for consumers. And we want to establish lasting partnerships between the consumers and the suppliers. You can go to any of our social media platforms. We have an Instagram page, we have LinkedIn, and you're able to access our registration form. As I said, we are a broad-based organization which will be based on membership. Now, basically our mission, Shane, we want to inform, educate, advocate for consumer rights through the dissemination of information and other engaging platforms. And we're also looking to use strategies that will ensure that the consumer rights are protected, or consumers are protected against unfair and invidious practices in more or less to effect positive change in consumerism in Barbados. And we were aiming for a balanced situation. We want to give rise to a more equitable and competitive marketplace in Barbados. More or less, we intend through the work that we do to create an atmosphere for rebalancing the relationships between consumers and suppliers. So that's basically what BCN is about and who we are in a nutshell. You can contact us, and we have a number. The number is 426 2244. And, we have an application process. And once you connect to any of our social media platforms, you'll be able to register to join our association. So I hope that the viewing audience and listening audience got a synopsis of who we are. We're not an antagonistic organization. We're not going to war with anybody per se. We
Right.
are advocating. We're working with all political parties. We're working with the opposition. If there is an opposition, we're working with B, C. We're working with every political party because we believe that consumers in Barbados need a stronger voice.
So, Maureen, you're putting consumers first, so that's clear. Putting the
Absolutely.
rights of consumers first. I want to get Mitchenson in here as well to talk about his role in helping to push the agenda of the organization in helping consumers. Why do you think, Mitchenson, that this organization is so critical at this point in time?
Yeah, basically from my experience with it. First of all, good night and good night to your viewers and listeners.
Yes, good night.
So basically, my experience is very wide, very, very wide. You may wonder how I got involved in this, saying that I'm from you may consider a completely different background because basically I'm from the aviation background. But my business basically has been providing and ensuring that Barbadians get the best for their money. For instance, I started off as a simple assistant air traffic controller and went through the system to reach the position of director. How I got involved with consumers and the Barbadians, I will just give you three quick things that I ensure that we can progress as a country. Actually, I was one of the persons from the members of the Barbados Civil Aviation Training Center, which was there to train air traffic controllers, not only in Barbados, but across the region. I then went on. In 1989, I was selected by the United Nations, the International Civil Aviation Organization, to transition the Western Hemisphere to satellite technology. And here, one of the first things on my agenda was to ensure that we created a satellite environment within the Caribbean. And obviously, I've been looking out for Barbados, and I quickly ensured that we got our WGS 84 coordinates. I had a tremendous amount of training from NASA and all of that. And here you are now, Shane. You can sit down and plot on your phone and do all your travel. And this is something for the people of this country where they can use the technology to move around. And actually, I am certain that not even many people realize that a single public officer, and I want to make that very clear, because in all the discussions that we hear, we don't hear anything about the public officers. And I was a public officer, spending 48 years.
Right.
And then I move on from that to my other thing. In terms of the people, Shane, I believe you have a cell phone. I was instrumental in ensuring that we had a cell phone environment in Barbados. And I would have worked with all these companies. So basically, people, service, this is what I am all about. And I would have spent a tremendous amount of time with the National Union of Public Workers, spent a long time at the Severance Payment Tribunal at National Insurance. I was a member and things of this nature. So I know that I have a knack for serving people, and I think that I like to see people get the best. In terms of BCEN, actually, as I said, I came directly out of their political system because there are three systems of government: the legislature, there is the judiciary, and there's the executive. I came out of the executive because that's where you find the ministries and the public offices and all that. So I know what it is like to work in the public service. BCEN is not one of these public entities. What we are here to do is to ensure that justice is served. And if you look at our logo, you will see that the scale of balance forms part of our logo to ensure that there is balance. We are not here to fight anybody. We are not going to be confrontational. We are going to ensure that both sides, both the producers and the suppliers, get their due just as much as the public, we are all consumers. Thank you.
Well, I must salute you for creating or being a part of creating this cell phone environment, this cellular phone environment, because without it, I don't know where I would be. Let's welcome Professor Watson now. I want to hear from him. Professor Watson, talk about your relationship with BCEN.
No, I do not have a direct relationship with BCEN. I heard of it through Maureen, who's a friend of mine, right? Because I'm not based on the ground in Barbados. I live overseas. I've been out of Barbados for 57 years, right?
Wow.
I have done research on Barbados. I just put out 2 volumes entitled Errol Barra on the post-war transformation of Barbados, the late colonial period from the 20s to the 60s of independence. And then the second volume deals with the fever of independence. So I've been in and out of Barbados doing research and doing a number of other things, right? So I cannot speak directly to BCEN, but I can certainly attempt to tell you how from an academic and an intellectual point of view, working in the area of international political economy, how I view these matters, in what I would call now a post-colonial society like Barbados. And what I would have to say would not be peculiar to Barbados, but it's Barbados that we're talking about, right? So right. The point at this juncture is, would you like me to go a little further and provide the context in which I see the issues that are being discussed about consumerism and consumer affairs?
And that is what we will be getting into in short order, because it's good to have that perspective where you are on the outside looking in and tell us some of the similarities that you can see in terms of consumerism in the U.S. and compare it to what is happening here. Because one thing that has been affecting consumers across the board and across the world is rising prices, and then there's also inflation and a number of other issues, a lot of them prompted by COVID-19, and then there is the war in Ukraine. So we'll get into all of those details in a matter of moments. Of course, callers, you can join the program as well and talk to our guests about BCEN and have your consumer issues heard tonight. Those numbers to call, 228-5562, 228-5563. We'll get into those questions and get some answers for you after the break. But we have a lot to talk about as far as consumerism is concerned. There is the Consumer Protection Act, of course, the FTC hearing, and everyone is waiting to hear if the Barbados Light and Power Company will get an increase. No one wants that. No one wants to spend more money on electricity or anything else, because the cost of living here in Barbados and across the world is going up. So these and other issues we will be delving into in short order right here on The People's Business as we talk about consumerism and you with BCEN. We'll be back after this break. It's all about the consumers tonight and the issues that all of us are facing when we head to the supermarket, when we go to pay bills and face other issues right across the board. We have Maureen Holder, the Interim Executive Director of BCEN. Let's go get into that. Talk about what we are seeing on the ground now. There is a Consumer Protection Act. Is this something that you're going to be looking at as well, the legislation governing consumerism in Barbados, as the Interim Executive Director of BCEN?
We're working very, very closely with the Office of Public Counsel and the Fair Trading Commission. Now, we can go much broader and wider than both of those organizations can. And largely because we are an NGO. Now, I don't know if a lot of people realize that the Fair Trading Commission doesn't do the pricing. So we can touch pricing where we see there are discrepancies, where we see that the consumers are complaining when they go to the supermarket, they see a number of anomalies and they bring their complaints to us. That is where we will do our investigation. That is where we would look into the matter and advise accordingly. Yes, Shane, we're going to be using the Consumer Guarantees Act. That's a very, very important piece of legislation that the consumers of Barbados should be educated about. I know that the Fair Trading Commission and the Office of Public Counsel have done considerable uh, workshops and various lectures to educate Barbadians about what their consumer rights are. And we will come in to more or less support what the Fair Trading Commission and also the Office of Public Counsel have been doing in terms of that educating and empowering consumers. But we want to take it a step further. We want to look at the quality of service, especially customer service in Barbados. That's one of our major projects that we're going to bring on screen. As you know, Shane, we've now started. We haven't got the minister signing off on our letters for incorporation as yet. We hope that that will be done in the shortest so that we can move on with many of the projects that we said we want to do. So yes, the Consumer Guarantees Act is a major piece of legislation that we will be reviewing from time to time, um, and we will use it to offer guidance to consumers wherever there is a problem. Also, we're guided by the UN. The UN also has, United Nations that is, also has some guidelines that offers protection to consumers, as well as the CARICOM Treaty. In the CARICOM Treaty, it's protection and what is the role of the various national organizations that have been set up to govern consumer rights. So our mandate is very broad-based and intense. We've got our work cut out for us. But as I said, one of the major projects is looking at the quality of service and looking at pricing in Barbados. Because for us, I mean, whenever you hear about something in the atmosphere, even if it's a natural disaster, all of a sudden pricing go up. Now, there's no legislation out there that stops retailers and suppliers from carrying up their prices or what they call, quote unquote, taking advantage of the environment or the forces of the marketplace. There's no legislation preventing that. But what we find is that with barely enough money in consumers' pockets, in times of natural disasters, they should not be having to go to a supermarket to buy something like a garden hose that costs maybe twice or maybe a quarter of the, an additional quarter of the amount that it would normally cost. These things are wrong in our view, and there's nothing in the legislation that prevents the retailers from taking what they call advantage of market forces. Why should we, something on the shelf, supermarket shelf, that ordinarily costs $5 for us to purchase, as soon as we hear a disaster coming, it goes up to $7 or $7.50 or something like that. That's not fair. So we're going to look at those things very, very closely and bring some recourse to our consumers and to our membership as they bring in their complaints.
It would be interesting to try to prove that and show that that actually happens and let people really see what happens and how consumers are really taken advantage of, as you say, in events of natural disaster. It's real.
Absolutely, Shane. And that's why our membership, their receipts, one of the things that we're going to be emphasizing, those receipts. We want at some point in time to be able to offer an app where you can compare your shopping. Like if you shopped last month and you compare it to how you shop this month to see where the variations in pricing are, we're going to collate that information. We're going to gather that information. And we know for a fact, Shane, it has happened to me. It has happened to consumers out there. And you go to a supermarket, the thing normally costs $2. Again, let me use that example. Something is happening in the environment. The thing gone up to $4. And we know, we came yesterday, we saw it as $2, and now it's $4. So these things are, in our view, not good for the consumer. It disadvantages the consumer, especially where many Barbadians are out of work. Many Barbadians have not had a salary increase in eons. And we understand the current circumstances. We understand COVID has had a nasty impact on our economy, but yet there has to be some fairness in the marketplace.
Well, you're here to help. You and your organization are going to help consumers be seen. And I'm pretty sure that they're thankful for that. We already have a caller on the line. Of course, our other guests will have their opportunity to have their say as well. Let's go to the phone lines very quickly. Good night, caller. Welcome to the People's Business. What's your question or comment?
Good night. Yeah. My point I want to make is why we appreciate the new formation.
Okay. Well, hopefully we reconnect with that caller when they do chime back in. Okay, I'm not hearing the caller.
Hello?
Well, hopefully we can get that sorted out in a matter of moments. Mitch, I want you to chime in here as well. What concerns do you have? What are some of your main concerns when you see, as Maureen was mentioning, these issues with cost of living and price changes taking effect suddenly when things happen? What is your take on the situation generally, and how should it be dealt with?
Persons who are involved in vending and so on in Barbados, and this attitude of strictly rod when the iron is hot, and as Maureen would have said, they just try to inflate prices when something is going on. And another thing that really bothers me is profiling. I find that when you go into businesses, they tend to profile you. I have had some bad experiences. Interestingly, Shane, I am a GCN. And you'd be surprised that I will go to a vendor and you will go to the same vendor and we buy the same item and my price is greater than yours because he's pro. These are the things that happen. Service. Might one of the other things is service. I'll give you an example, a classic example. Only 2 weeks ago, there was an extradition on the community on me. 2 days later, I went to a business and the attendant totally disregarded me. I said, excuse me, sir. Totally disregarded me. The gentleman walked away from me. He never looked at me. And I went over to another guy who told me, well, he does not work in that section, but he will come and service me. And I said, your colleague such as did so and so and so and so. I said, would you believe that only 2 days ago my picture was in the nation here as one of the persons in Barbados, one of the builders of Barbados? He said, oh yes, I saw it it's in my car. And this is the thing that you get, people profiling. And you do not get the service that you should get based on probably to them how you look and who they perceive you to be. You get different pricing based on who you are and things of that nature. These are some of the things that we really need to educate our people on and get customer service really going. Is unfortunate, Shane, but this is how it is in this country. And as a member of BCEN, I would ensure that we get the education programs out there that our people can be educated to be able to benefit so that when they go, they have the knowledge, they have the experiences, and they have the skills to know what type of service they should be experiencing.
Yeah. Well said. Professor Watson, this is what post-colonial Barbados looks like when we talk about, as you heard Maureen and Mitch mention, these high prices and basically consumers being put in a position where they're taken advantage of. This is nothing, as we know, that is isolated to Barbados. We wouldn't want it to be happening here. However, it is. What do you see in your jurisdiction? What are some of the lessons that you think that can be learned, that we can instill here in Barbados to address some of these matters, these issues that we face as consumers?
Okay, let me preface my comment in the following way. So I noticed that in the government, there is a Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs, there is a Fair Trading Commission, there is an Office of Ombudsman, and I listened to Maureen and Mitchenson, And I'm saying to myself, so there is an issue here, a big issue. The issue, therefore, is what is the nature of the power in the society? Is it popular power in what you call a democratic society where the voices of the broad mass of people count significantly? Or is it more of the traditional top-down authoritarianism that is built into the political culture of post-colonial societies? I would argue that all of these societies across the region that came out of colonialism and imperialism have a built-in top-down authoritarian tradition. I think that the popular power does not exist. And fundamentally, the fact that Maureen and Mitchenson and others have to be doing the things they're doing with the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs and the Fair Trading Commission and an Office of Ombudsman tells you that there is a fundamental, what I call an alienation of power away from the people in the broad sense of the term. The question then is, how do you seek to bring this within the range of what I might call popular power and popular decision making? That does not obtain in this society any more than in Jamaica or Trinidad or Guyana or St. Kitts Nevis or the Dominican Republic or Haiti or so for that matter, right? Now, here in the United States where I am, I have relocated to this community less than 3 months ago. And it's not peculiar to this, but it's across the country. We have people you refer to as consumers lamenting this ongoing increase in prices, the inflationary impact. You listen to the head of the Federal Reserve telling us fundamentally that they've just increased interest rates by 75 basis points, right? And I was reading an article only last night in which the author who covers business says that this new increase is likely to contribute to another 1 million jobs being lost, because the aim to control inflation is to put the pressure on the working people, because they are saying, assuming people are spending too much or buying too much. That is a symptom of what the real structural problem is, because where you have production for profit, the aim of the producer is to maximize profits and return, not to meet the needs of consumers. So consumers are caught in what I call a vortex, this churning of massive, if you will, metaphorically speaking, waters and strings that come together at like a mixing point, and that vortex becomes very problematic, and it is difficult for people then to find their moorings in that kind of environment. I want to argue from an academic and intellectual point of view, given the kind of research I have done and continue to do, that in these systems, all notions of justice, freedom, democracy, human rights, the whole panoply are subsumed under an economic arrangement in which the powerful have the right to do the things they do. And it is hard to find most of these governments that are not in some way beholden to those powerful interests, while at the same time seeking the claim to address the needs of what in this discussion we are calling consumers, right? And I have a lot to say about this concept of consumers and why I find it interesting, but at the same time problematic. So these are structural issues. Imagine what Maureen and Mitchenson and others are attempting to do around consumer rights, and yet you've got these agencies that are supposed to be representing broader interests. Those interests are not there as primary, they are secondary, and they're subsumed within power relations, because power is not a zero-sum game where someone has it and you have to fight to take some from them. It is produce, reproduce, the spaces of it might expand or they might contract. But what the broad mass of people need, as in what Maureen and Mitchenson are talking about, is not only advocacy, but they need what I call organic intellectuals who make a priority of presenting their interests and seeing the issues somewhat differently than, say, Maureen or Mitchenson might do, because as they're talking, I understand why they're saying we're not confrontational, we don't want to fight anybody, whatever. But believe me, the people at the top are fighting tooth and nail to maintain their positions of power. Right? And they are getting it because they are closely allied with the political forces that govern the society. And as I said, it's not peculiar to Barbados. In the United States, you had the Republicans and the Trump, when they issued the tax cuts, and Trump went up to New York and went to a big dinner and said publicly, I have just made you people more money than you ever thought you could get. Right? That's the President of the United States speaking. To whom? The wealthy and the powerful. Are you aware that the head of Starbucks, that coffee shop in the United States, has increased his personal wealth by $991 million since the pandemic started? That's just one. And more money has gone to the top in the last 2 years than anybody believed was possible, right? So it's about power. And the question is, if you're operating from a position of weakness, relatively speaking, how do you change the power dynamics and the power relationships in the society? In the United States, people are suffering. Massive numbers of people are suffering in this context, right? A few months ago, I was paying like $5.49 for 1 gallon of diesel. Now, you might say, like, hold it. That's really cheap compared with what it is, in Barbados. But that's a massive amount of money. Right now, diesel, my vehicle runs on diesel. Is at least the minimum I see around my area is $4.50, for 1 gallon, right? Now you go into the supermarket, and as the others are saying, today you go and the price of A is this, you go back next week and it's up by 10%, 15%. And I'm absolutely convinced that whatever people may say about these so-called market forces, that when you operate from a position of power, you're able to do a number of things. It's not that there's no rationality in the way that term is used where the market is concerned, but power allows you to gouge. Power allows you to put your invisible handcuffs on the broad mass of the people and to put them at a greater disadvantage, because you can't afford to have popular power running any society where the means of production are in the hands of a few people. And that is exactly how these societies are organized.
Right. And BCEN is going to help to shake off those shackles, we hope. And I know that, of course, Maureen has put the number out there for people to call to join the organization possibly, or to just air their comments and have their issues heard. And I'm pretty sure that phone will be ringing after this program for days to come, because as consumers, we are really facing it. You spoke about diesel there just now. Diesel prices here in Barbados went up a few days ago again, even as the Prime Minister and her team have been trying to put a control on these fuel prices. There's so much to talk about when you're talking about consumerism. So we're going to take a break. I'm pretty sure we have some more callers on the line. We're going to get them in so that you can answer their questions as well, Maureen, Mitch, and Professor Watson. And we will be back to talk a bit more about BCEN and consumerism and you. Okay, so I had to hold this topic because I know that if we started with this, it would probably take up the entire program, of tonight's program, which is the FTC rate hearing and what is happening with the Barbados Light and Power Company as it applies for a rate increase. Of course, the interveners are representing on the consumers' behalf, and the BLPC, they have their officials presenting their case. But before we get to that conversation, which I'm pretty sure will take up a little bit of our time here on tonight's edition of The People's Business, let's go to the phone line and welcome in our first caller of the night. Good night, caller. Welcome to The People's Business. What's your question or comment?
Hi, good night.
Hi, good night.
My comment is to ask first, don't we have the Productivity Council and the Barbados Standards Institute, fair training, and different consumer bodies before? And is it fair to say that the way that we go about, as Maureen is saying, she don't want to be confrontational, right? But I think we have to be confrontational in dealing with the the manufacturers and those people if we really want to get somewhere. Because I think a lot of products comes into Barbados that are not up to the standard, and consumers cannot read anything on the cans or anything. They don't know what's in it, right? And that should not be able to enter a country without the consumer being able to read what's on it.
Well, caller, thank you for that question and comment all in one there. The Productivity Council, I think that organization has been disbanded. Of course, government has gone another direction. Maureen, you want to take that one?
I mean, there's not much I can say. You don't have to be confrontational about raising an issue with respect to labeling. I mean, if it's a matter that our membership brings to us, certainly we'll be looking into it. I mean, we have to look at the fact that there are a number of items on supermarket shelves that have been banned in certain jurisdictions, but somehow they end up here. That's another area we're going to be looking at. If it's a matter of labeling, then that will come to us as a matter of concern, but it's not for us to determine how things can be labeled. So you don't necessarily have to be confrontational about everything. But let me just say this, It's saying that we're not confrontational means that we're not going to pick unnecessary fights. If we believe strongly that, and we can prove it because investigation is going to be one of our hallmarks. We're going to be researching because any and everybody cannot bring it and say, this is what happened to me. They have to bring the facts. Then we have to be able to research it and verify it. And then if there's any case for us to take up on their behalf, we will take it up. And certainly there's strength in numbers. So advocating, forms of advocacy is our last resort. And we're prepared to use it when the time calls for it. But right now, as I said, we're interested in creating or I should say, rebalancing the relationship between the consumer and the supplier. So there's no need to create this division or this gulf because all of us, everybody here or everybody in this country is a consumer. The supplier is a consumer at some point in time. So we recognize that we have a duty to perform for retirees, for students, for housewives, for pensioners, everybody who calls themselves a consumer. And in listening to Professor Watson, he had a concern with the classification, who or what is classified a consumer. I think at some point in time we want to hear from Professor Watson. I so enjoyed his commentary. But again, we have to be mindful of the kind of society that we live in. I mean, we're a small 2x6 nation. Everybody knows everybody. But again, it is that business community. What we find is that, and this is from my own observation and analysis, the business community would know that they would have an issue with the rise or the increase in electricity costs. They would know that they have that as a concern and would not say anything about it because they know somebody who knows somebody, and that kind of camaraderie and familiarity.
Maureen,
exists.
as you're going there then, well, let's get into it. This FTC hearing, the BLMP, they're saying that they really have no choice but to ask for an increase at this time, that they're not making enough money to run the network as they would like to provide a quality service to Barbadian customers. What is BCEN's take on this?
Well, I mean, we issued a statement that was carried last week in the Nation and Barbados Today. Let me just say, yes, Light and Power, by all means, you have to do what you have to do to give us consistent electricity and a supply that speaks of the standard that you're supposed to have. But at this present moment in time, where many Barbadians are feeling the burden of financial responsibility, overburden in some cases, what you're asking for, in our view, is unacceptable, and it doesn't sit well. I don't understand how the Light and Power can say to us, We want 11, as much as 11% rate increase. We want it now in order to give you a better electricity service. We are saying you got to get it from us. Can't it be done in another way? Can't you absorb more of the risk? Can't you go the route of getting a loan and work up some other thing? Why does it have to come from us? You've had a rate increase before, and for some reason or not, your infrastructure was not brought up to the standard, or I would imagine it has wear and tear by now. Even if you did some infrastructural development, by now it should have some wear and tear. And you're coming to us and saying, look, we cannot give you the type of service that you want unless you give us this money. What is the risk to the light and power? That's the fundamental question. You're taking a very low risk, and the only people that are going to be benefiting from this proposed rate increase are the shareholders, the people who are involved in the group of companies. So that's the kind of thing that we want to say to them. We're not ready for this. We're now coming out of the heels of the COVID. We are really facing dire times. And not no. In fact, what we want, I would dare say, is lower electricity rates, if anything. For a long time, we've been paying high electricity rates. So what we want is basically lower electricity rates, not necessarily higher electricity rates.
Well, I'll tell you that that is not going to happen. Lower electricity rates. Renewable energy can play a part, but
there you go.
I had a conversation with a gentleman, an elderly gentleman the other day. He said to me, in all his life, he's never seen prices come down. Prices always go in one direction. And that is the gospel truth. Yep. Mitch, what's your take on the Barbados Light and Power Company's case for its rate increase?
Interesting, Shane. Actually, I have a long relationship with Barbados Light and Power, because I was the officer working back in the days with the CEO, Mr. Gittins and Peter Williams and these guys, when they installed the 4 turbine generators at the airport. And I'm the person who gave permission. I did all the profiles and so on. So yeah, I have a very long working relationship with them. However, we in BCEN, we have a tremendous amount of information on light and power as it relates to this whole rate hearing. And the things that should have been done that were not done and so on. To use a Barbadian parlance right now, we believe that the consumers in Barbados are dead horses, and we are trying to whip dead horses to get them to perform. There is no doubt in anybody's mind, including the government of Barbados, that the consumers are unable to pay at a time like now. I don't think that anybody is trying to say that light and power should not get to raise. I don't think that is the argument. The argument is no. Can we afford it? No. And the question is, the answer to that is simply no. And we believe that, what are you doing? You're providing a service to consumers. The consumers cannot afford. So how are you going to increase or inflate prices on them? It is very, very difficult. A lot of people will drop out. Now, that price is not going to just stay there on a light bill. The businesses are going to pass on that cost to the consumer to already high-priced goods. And it is going to cause tremendous inflation. We need to do something about it. We need to look at it carefully and say, look, the country is not in a position that we can afford this at this time. Let us talk about it a little later. I think we got to be fair and honest. As I said, I don't believe in confrontation. I like to be fair, frank, and at the same time frank.
C2 Sab, the Congress of Trade Unions and Staff Associations of Barbados has been sharing your sentiment, saying that now is not the time. And I remember in our news last night, the General Secretary Dennis DePisa speaking to the possibility of even layoffs happening if this rate increase was to go ahead. But we still wait and see. Of course, the rate hearing continues into this week, and we'll hear more about that in the next few days. We have another caller on the line. Let's hear from our viewers. Welcome to the People's Business Caller. Good night. What's your question?
Thank you, and good night to you, Sean, or good evening, and to your guests. I don't really have a comment. I have a comment and a suggestion. I just want to say that I'm really pleased that you have some well-meaning individuals, coming together to establish this much-needed organization in Barbados. There've been some attempts in the past which kind of, came to nothing. Now, I heard Ms. Holder intimate that she would not be antagonistic, right? That's fine. But I hope she recognizes that by virtue of defending the rights and interests of consumers, you will encounter antagonism and cynicism. So I hope you're prepared for that fight. My suggestion is that I would like to see the organization place some emphasis on educating Barbadians that true and prudent consumerism also embraces ownership and economic empowerment. We would recall that Martin Luther King was able to galvanize, those consumers in Atlanta, Georgia, to boycott those bus companies for a wider social good. So my hope in concluding is that the organization would see consumerism in Barbados in terms of the more fundamental issue of the economic empowerment of Black Barbadians. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I can tell you this, caller, the BCEN stands for Barbados Consumer Empowerment Network, and I'm pretty sure that word was put in there for a reason, right, Maureen?
Absolutely. And economic enfranchisement is not something that we can directly help consumers with. What we can do is offer them the education. We said that is what we will do. I mean, as much I can say in relation to the caller's comment, but
Right.
Thank him nonetheless for his input.
I'm pretty sure you're going to get some support for sure, because
Yeah,
consumers want help. We want a voice as consumers. Professor Watson, you've heard, I'm pretty sure you've heard about this call for the rate increase by the Barbados Light and Power Company. As you look in from the outside, what's your take on this situation? What do you think can happen in this case?
That is very interesting. I have been following some of the discussion on Facebook, in those spaces on Facebook where people engage serious issues and don't talk so much about what their grandkids ate for dinner and so forth, right? And there's been some serious discussion there. And I noticed that persons who have been addressing the issue from the vantage point of the broader public very patriarchal society in large measure, and also, because she is a woman, she is knowledgeable, she knows what she's talking about, and I have found her argument convincing and compelling. Now, Mitchenson made a couple of remarks there about some things pertaining to Barbados Light and Power, and I found those, very useful as well. But businesses are always motivated by the following: never let a good crisis go to waste. How can you intervene in a situation of crisis to strengthen your particular position? And it might not be, accidental that BLMP would come at this particular time asking for this particular rate increase. I don't think they were anticipating the pushback in the populace. In what the minister said, and I felt that was so vulgar and crude in that particular context. The point I'm making is, who is speaking for the broad mass of people? You can have a Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs and the Ombudsman Office and the Fair Trading Commission, and that's there in principle way, almost like a front. It is behind the scenes where the decisions, are made. My thinking is that the company has done this in a strategic way to wear down the public and hope that there's sufficient strategic support for their position whereby they get the increase. I think Tricia and company made some very powerful points of view that Mitchenson went back to about the way this company has operated over time, what they have failed to do at particular moments, and they therefore did not follow through. They did not improve the infrastructure. They did not improve efficiency to deliver the service if you will, at a rate that meets societal needs more effectively, more efficiently, more competitively. Having failed here, they are now asking for more money, and they will pass this on to the consumer. It will have an inflationary impact on what is already an extremely import dependent society. You are aware, I think, of the massive import bill of Barbados, the fact that in relative terms, maybe, I don't know what the percent of the land in this country is now idle. There's no parish or community you can drive through and not see a massive amount of idle land where you don't have an attempt to meet people's needs at the level of food production, right? But I would like to take this a little further, if you will.
Well, just hold that thought. Hold that thought. We'll take a quick break, and then we have a few minutes, and then we'll get some final words from each of you as we wrap up this edition of The People's Business as we talk about consumerism and you. We'll be back in a few moments. We have a few more minutes to spend with you on this edition of The People's Business as we had a very nice conversation. Nice is not really the word, but a robust conversation on consumerism and you. So I want to give all of our guests, Maureen, Mitch, and Professor Watson, I want to give you each 1 minute to make some final points as we end tonight's discussion. And we got to stick to that time, 1 minute each. So Maureen, I want to start with you. Talk about BCEN, what's going to happen going forward, and what you are focusing on first in the interest of consumers. It may be the same situation with the Barbados Light and Power Company.
Now, let me remind Barbadians, it's called the Barbados Consumer Empowerment Network, and our overriding mandate is to empower consumers, the efforts to ensure that they receive value for money for goods and services in Barbados. And we are people-centered. We are building awareness, encouraging analysis, and pursuing advocacy wherever necessary. The number you can reach us by is 426-2244, or you can go to our email address at BCEN, in fact, let me say so you get it, BCEN246@gmail.com, and there you can register to become a member. And of course, one of our biggest priorities well, Shane, you said it, we're focusing on the rate hearing that is currently going on, and we are going to do 2 town hall meetings, and we are going to go into our membership and recruitment drive very, very shortly, because we need to have people on board who can assist us rise to the occasion and facilitate what we at BCN are doing.
Mitch, some final comments from you?
Yeah, I came to BC as a person with a tremendous amount of experience, as I said earlier. I represented Barbados far and wide in the nation. I was at the United Nations, sitting on the board quickly, and what I've done is I've adjusted the climate change resolution that had destroyed the air passenger duty. And Professor talked about cells of power. Up until today, not one person from tourism has ever said anything to me about getting the air passenger duty removed from off of things.
That would be another interesting topic that we need to really get into. Maybe we
Right,
can
and
have
the point
another
that I'm
show on
making
that.
is
Very quickly.
right. The point that I'm making is that I have a tremendous amount of experience and so on in representing people, and I brought this to BC. I don't want to take it to the grave with me, and I intend to ensure that Barbados become what it should be. Thank you very much.
Professor Watson, your
Yes.
final words for the night.
Oh,
30 seconds
okay.
or so you have.
Since we're talking about consumers and consumerism, we keep in mind that consumers are parents, they are workers, they are employed, part-time workers, semi-employed. There are large numbers of women in Barbadian society, a highly patriarchal society. And in this particular context, with respect to this question of consumerism, goods are produced for exchange. We consume them, whether the things we eat or things we wear or things, the vehicles we drive, purchases we made, and so on. But we need to see the social relations that exist beneath the surface, right? Because when we focus on the consumer as a given, the product looks like an end in itself, and we don't see
Indeed.
the relationships that are built behind the scene. And that
Yeah.
is where we need to locate this issue about the consumer in Barbadian society, the gendered social relations, to get a clear idea of how the impacts of this process are differentially felt by different social groups and class strata in the society.
Well, we hope that BCEN can examine all of these issues facing consumers in Barbados. And I know with Maureen at the helm, they'll have a very active voice in that regard. I want to thank all of you for sharing your expertise, your knowledge,
Thank you, Shane.
and a
Thank
bit
you.
about what we need to do for consumers here in Barbados. And I wish you all the best on your,
Thank you very
much.
your ventures with the
Appreciate it.
organization. And of course, viewers,
Thank
we
you.
must thank you for watching another edition of The People's Business. I'm Shane Seeley. Have a good night.
Thank you. Goodbye.